When Yosef brings Menashe and Ephraim to Yaakov for the bracha, as we know, the Torah says, it's one of the most famous episodes in the Torah. He brought Menashe and Ephraim. Yaakov already can't see, he's already very old. So Yosef puts Menashe, who's the older son, on the right side of Yaakov, on his left side, which is the right side of Yaakov. He puts Ephraim on his right side, which is the left side of Yaakov, and he's waiting for Yaakov to put his hands on his children. Yaakov switches his hands. He puts his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Menashe. Yosef tries to switch it back. He says, Yadati b'ni Yadati. I know he's big. Menashe is a big boy, but Ephraim's going to be even bigger. Rashi brings already the Chazal that explain Menashe is going to be, from Menashe is going to come Gidon. Gidon was a big shofet. He's somebody who won the war and miraculously won the war. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose him to be the shofet on Klal Yisrael. He's a big man. But Yeshua is going to be even bigger. Yeshua comes from Ephraim, so therefore I'm putting my right hand on Ephraim. Shem Shmuel gives a beautiful explanation of what's going on over here. What was the discussion? What was Yosef saying? What was Yaakov saying? And so really there was a very deep argument going on between Yosef and Yaakov. And Yaakov was teaching Yosef a very important lesson. We know that the Navi in Shoftim, the Navi says, Lech b'choichacho. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu appoints Gidon to be the Shofet, he says, go with your own koyach, with your own power, with your own strength. And Chazal explained that he was somebody who built himself up. Gidon was somebody who built himself up, b'choichacho, from his own koyach. And Yosef saw this in his nevuah. Also, Yosef knew, just like Yaakov knew, that there'll be a Gidon. Yeshua, on the other hand, what do we know about Yeshua? Pnei Yeshua, Pnei Alavana. He doesn't even have his own light. It's like the moon, that he only reflects the light of the sun. He's nar loy mosh mikarav machna. He's always misharis Moshe. He's always together with Moshe. He's never building himself up. It seems like he's always hiding under Moshe's shadow. When it comes time for a shir, he's the one setting up the tables and the chairs for Moshe Rabbeinu. This is somebody who's a leader. Okay, he's going to be a teacher also because he received from Moshe. But isn't Gidon much stronger? Gidon, who built himself up from scratch, from himself. He's somebody who's a hero. He's somebody who built himself up. Says Yaakov, Yadati b'ni Yadati. You don't understand. Somebody who builds himself up is Gevaldik. Gidon is a very strong person. He's a shofet. He was a shofet of Klal Yisrael. Deserves our respect. But Yeshua ben Nun, the person who's humble, who's always being mevatel himself to his Rebbe, to Moshe Rabbeinu, he's the one that's going to be the real leader. He's the one that's going to give Klal Yisrael the Nachal in Eretz Yisrael, which is everlasting. He's the one that's going to give over the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, the tziner through which the Torah goes from Moshe Rabbeinu to all of Klal Yisrael. You know why? Because he was mevatel himself, not in spite of the fact that he was mevatel himself to his Rabbeim, but on the opposite. Because he was mevatel himself and he was humble, and the midah of humility is what gives a person leadership. This is what the true leadership, according to Torah, is about. We now finish the shleishim on a personal level of a relative, a dear relative, a goyin and a Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Akiva Steinman, Zechat Tzadik Levracha, Akiva Yosef ben Shlomi Chil Michael, who was known in Toronto and around the world. He was a dayan on the Toronto in the Kollel Bezdin. He was also an expert, a world expert in Erevin. Rav Shlomo Miller, the Rosh Kollel Shlita, said about him that he's a bakin kol chelkei Shulchan Aruch. People would come to him, ask him questions. I also personally turned to him quite a few times with questions in halacha, and he's somebody who 40 years ago came to the Kollel, to join the Kollel as a younger man, until the last day of his life, literally sat in the Oleh Shel Torah, in the four walls of the Kollel, and that's where he could always be found. No matter if it was a question about Erevin, if it was a question about Chesed Mishpat, about Yeridei, a deep question, he needed to find Rabbi Akiva. You knew you can find him in the Kollel with the Gemara and his Shtender. This was his whole life, his entire life. And he always used to say, I'm a Talmud of Rav Shlomo Miller, I'm a Talmud of the Rosh Kollel. But Lamaisa, somebody who was mevatel himself to his Rabbeim, somebody who was mevatel himself to the Oleh Shel Torah, Lamaisa became one of the world-renowned experts in Erevin, like we said, somebody who was known around the world as an expert in halacha, for sure in Toronto and even beyond. He was known to be somebody who was me'al umei aver, and he was a lesson, a paradigm of what we're talking about, what the Shem Shmuel talks about Ephraim. Because Yeshua was mevatel himself, that's how he became great. Rabbi Akiva, Zechat Tzadik Levracha, became great because he was mevatel himself, because of his humility. Yehi Zechrei Baruch Tenei Nafshei Tzura B'Tzrar HaChayim. Good Shabbos.